Hi, this is John again, the owner and developer of VectorDecks. In this tutorial, we're going to add this particular post sleeve to VectorDecks Use Rel Objects option menus. As you see here, I have this template I made to help me when I create new objects and placing them in their proper locations and getting their proper dimensions. For a more complete description of how I use this document, how I brought in this particular PDF and scaled it to create all these different objects, please go back to my Create Your Custom Objects Basics tutorial where I go into this in great detail. Also, in my tutorial for bringing this particular 2x2 post over, I explained in more detail the steps involved and the whys and the wheres when creating your own custom object. So it might also be helpful to review the tutorial for the post object to have a better understanding of that. Now let's go ahead and work on this sleeve. Go ahead and select it, copy it, and then as I explained with the post tutorial, we're going to paste it in a blank document. That way we don't have the clutter that we have with the template showing all the different objects. And then I always like to maneuver it to the center of the page on this document. This makes things a little easier in the next steps. Now let's navigate down to the VectorDecks data folder. But before we go there, we need to make sure that this particular resource browser is the actual resource browser for this particular document. See, with VectorWorks, you can have multiple documents open. I have two, on Title 2 and on Title 3. But sometimes a resource browser here could be the document that you're not actually working on. That one's in the background, and at times this can get complicated. So VectorWorks made this neat little home icon here. So we want to make sure that we need the resource browser for this particular document we're working on. So as a safety, I always go and click on that little home button, and that'll make sure it'll bring up that particular resource browser for this document. Now let's go back to that VectorDecks data folder. Go ahead and double click on that to open it. Now this is a sleeve object, and it resides in VectorDecks Rel Post Objects. So let's open its folder. Now go ahead and open that Rel Post Sleeves folder. It's very important to make sure you're working in the right folders. You can name the objects whatever you want, but never change the names of all the different folders involved in VectorDecks Resource Palette. This is how I have the objects displayed in the VectorDecks menus. So don't ever change the names of the folders, but you can obviously name the objects anything you'd like. Now, as you see here, these are two-dimensional symbols based on that little icon with the X. Now in VectorWorks you can view this as thumbnails if you'd like, but I'm afraid that we're going to have quite a few different objects, and this can kind of fill this whole palette up. But in this particular view, you'll see that little 2 next to it. That's telling me that it's a two-dimensional object only. But I'm going to switch that view back to list, and then you'll be able to have a whole array of different objects, and it's easier to find. Now the best way to create a new object in VectorDecks is to duplicate an existing one in the folder that matches the object that you're working on. We're working on a sleeve, and we're in that sleeves folder. And then I try to find an object that best matches the object I'm trying to bring in. Now I only have two here, the 4x4 post sleeve and a 6x6 post sleeve. Now this is 5x5. So I'm just going to duplicate one of these and name it a 5x5. Now the best way of doing this is either go into this little button here in Resources and select Duplicate, or you can right click on any of the objects you want and scroll down to Duplicate. Now we're going to call this a 5x5 and do away with that -2 and click OK. Now it pops up and it appears here in this menu. Now we need to edit this because it's carrying all the information that's a 4x4 post sleeve. So again, you can either select it and go here to edit, or right click and select edit down here. Now this is a two-dimensional object, and by default, if it's a three-dimensional object, it may have either the three-dimensional checked or two-dimensional, because sometimes with three-dimensional objects you can have both. But in this particular one, it's only two-dimensional, so you want to make sure that that 2D is selected and click edit. And as you see here, we have that 4x4 profile instead of that 5x5. So let's go back and get that copy of the 5x5. Go ahead and exit that symbol. Copy this. And let's go back to that edit mode. And we're going to take this out. Go ahead and cut it out of there. And then go ahead and paste that 5x5 we created. Now again, it's very important that we center it in this particular window. It's using the center point of the object to display it in the rail in VectorDecks properly. And now we have the object in there, but we need to add certain dimensional record information. So go ahead and click off the object by deselecting it. We're still in this symbol edit mode, you could tell by this orange band around here, and click on this data option. And you see here by default it has the VectorDecks real parts selected, it's checked. And then it has these different fields for you to enter information in. And in VectorDecks, if any of the fields are emptied or anything zeroed out, it's not critical for the actual displaying of the object in the document. But if there's dimensions in there, it's very, very important that these dimensions are correct. Now you see here the width shows 4.5 and the depth 4.5. Now that's not what this particular sleeve is. And this is why I have that other document still open. You see here we have this sleeve. Now it's a 5x5, but the critical dimension we need is what the sleeve is going to fit over top of, and that's this area inside here. That's 3.5 by 3.5. That's the post that it's going to slip over top of. You see, as we draw the rail using the VectorDecks rail tool, it snaps or draws to the inside edge of the deck, and that's where all the calculations are based on. And this sleeve is going to fit over top of this post. So the critical dimension is 3.5 by 3.5. So let's go ahead and make those changes. First, go ahead and select the width. And let's set that width to 3.5. And now go ahead and select the depth and make it 3.5. Now we have everything we need. We need the proper dimension. So VectorDecks knows that this particular sleeve fits over top of a 3.5 inch by 3.5 inch post, and it's going to base its calculations on that. Oh, and yes, before you exit the symbol, go ahead and select shape. Click on that object again and make sure you're in the screen plane. If you're in the layer plane, it's going to want to snap over to 3D. Actually, it's a good idea to make sure that when you bring in the object, it's also in screen plane. Let's go ahead and exit this. And here at this level, you want to make sure that the object itself is set to screen plane. Now we have that new 5x5 post sleeve in our VectorDecks resource window, and it's also now available when you select that in VectorDecks rail options. Now the last thing we need to do before we work on bringing in any other objects is to save this so we don't lose everything we've just done. And what I'm going to do here is get rid of that object that we have on here. We're back to our blank screen, and then go to Save As Template. And I've been working on VectorDecks 10, and bringing all these rails in. So I'm just going to select that and click Save. It's going to tell me I'm replacing it. Now we have everything saved as that VectorDecks 10 template, and we haven't lost all the work we've just done. In our next tutorial, we're going to work on this particular post skirt that was made for this post sleeve we just brought in.